Hey, welcome to the Gig Life Podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Taylor. This is episode 83. It's with Jackie Barnes. Here we go. My guest today is Australian drumming powerhouse Jackie Barnes. Born into Australian music royalty as the son of legendary rock singer Jimmy Barnes, it seems Jackie was always destined to be part of the music industry. He discovered drums at age 5 through watching the great Tony Brock play drums in his father's band. After finishing high school studies in Sydney, Jackie began working in the local music scene, eventually auditioned successfully for the Jimmy Barnes Band in 2005, and immediately began touring locally and globally. After a few years in the band, he felt the necessity to branch out and expand his musical knowledge, so he applied, auditioned, and began a Bachelor of Music at the esteemed Berklee College of Music in Boston. Jackie toured the world with the Australian group The Ten Tenors, recorded drummers, percussion and vocals on the album Revolution with rock supergroup The Dead Daisies, and Jackie is also a long-time member of the Lockie Doley group, which has seen him tour constantly for the past 5 years. As well as still touring the world in his father's band, Jackie has had the chance to work with such greats as Keith Urban, Journey, Joe Bonamassa, Diesel, Ian Moss, Rose Tattoo, Bob Daisley, Steve Morse and Glenn Hughes, to name a few. With such great experience at age 34, it seems Jackie has a long, illustrious career ahead of him. Jackie's a great dude, worldly, humble, and takes nothing for granted. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Jackie Barnes. All right, I think we're rolling. Jackie Barnes, welcome to the Gig Life Podcast.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Sweet,
it's
man.
Good to be here.
What's going on? You're up in Queensland?
Yeah. So I'm up in the Sunshine Coast on Yurumba Beach, just kind of locked down.
So what's the lockdown level up there?
They've kind of eased it a little bit in the last couple of weeks. I mean, we're lucky here to be in quite an isolated part of the country, and there haven't really been that many new cases of late. So I think it's reasonably safe up here. Obviously, we're taking a lot of precautions and still staying home as much as we can, apart from groceries and things like that. But we're allowed to go to the beach. We're allowed to play golf. We're allowed to do kind of little things like that. I think you're allowed one or two people over, but we haven't really been doing that anyway. So
that's cool.
Yeah,
I think that's changing to 5 people. I think. Well, it is here in New South Wales. They're changing restrictions to level 3. I think it is. Oh, it's hard to keep up with it all, man. But yeah, we're a bit like you. We're just staying home, man. Like our kids are still home from school. Mm-hmm. We had them home a couple of weeks before.
Yeah.
They said you could keep them home, but we did anyway. I just head out for work and come back, and my wife, she's working from home and looking after the kids and homeschooling, and just it is what it is, eh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what were you doing music-wise sort of leading up to that, and what's the impact of this been on your gigs and stuff you had coming up?
Yeah, well, obviously I kind of finished up the bulk of my touring in December, and I kind of, purposely took a month or two off just to kind of take a break anyway. So I'd been, the last 10 years really, I've been touring pretty constantly.
Yeah.
And I've spent a lot of time overseas, a lot of time away from my family. So I kind of took stock in December at the end of, we just finished a tour with Dad, which was a really successful tour. It was a really big tour and a big undertaking. So once that was finished, I'd kind of been playing so many shows that I kind of felt a little bit like I needed to be at home for a while and needed to rest. And then, obviously Cold Chisel went on tour and I kind of was involved in that, not in a musical standpoint, but I was there, as a bit of a kind of tour manager and kind of helping out Dad on the road, just his kind of man on the ground.
Oh, great.
And that was nice to kind of just not have to worry about the performing, but, still be doing something to do with music. And then I was home, so I've been pretty much home since December. I had some shows with the Lockie Dolly group, which in actual fact was the last show I played, which was, I think, March 9, down 9 or 10, somewhere around there in Bangalore. And that was the last show I've played, and I've been home since. Yeah, so it's been pretty quiet. It's been pretty weird, for a man that's accustomed to being on the road constantly. It's quite an adjustment to just, have all the gigs dry up. Like I had a lot booked over the next year and a half.
Right.
And at the moment, everything's pretty much either on hold or it's being cancelled. So,
right.
Yeah, it's just it's a strange time, but I'm just enjoying spending time with my wife and kids and just enjoying being at home.
Yeah. And you got a bit of a studio there, so you're still able to play and keep your chops up and.
Yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't really call it a studio. I mean, I've got a dedicated space like / room in my house,
just like me,
that we just moved into.
I've got my drums over there, my guitars and all my other stuff. It's just my room.
Yeah.
It's my space.
The man cave.
The man cave,
really.
Man. Yeah, bro.
But, it's one of those things, like I have always been pretty useless when it comes to, music production, engineering and stuff like that. I dedicated so much of my career and my time to performing that I kind of, that's my kind of main skill. And I kind of always found the recording process in terms of, doing it like myself, I found it really tedious and hard to kind of get used to. And it just was something that I knew I needed to dedicate a lot of time to be able to do it right. But I never really found that time to do it. So that's what I've really been doing since I've been in lockdown, is I've kind of built up this little home studio. I've kind of learned how to work Logic, Pro Tools, using interfaces, plugins, all that sort of stuff. And I've just been really kind of, hunkering down and learning a new skill, so to speak. And I've actually just picked up the bass as well to kind of...
Yeah, I saw a photo of that. Nate Wood, look out. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Man. All right, well, let's roll right back to the early days. For people that don't know, Jackie's dad is the great Jimmy Barnes. So what I usually ask my guests is, was there music in the family? So that's probably a bit of a stupid question, that one.
Well, I mean, yeah, there was definitely.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's start at when music became apparent for you. Obviously, growing up from day one, I guess music would have been there. Was there a moment, an age where you saw somebody playing? I'm sure you would have gone to shows and seen your dad play and. Maybe realise, I think I want to do something like that, pick up an instrument. And
it really started straight away for me. When I was born, Dad was overseas in the US with, he was touring, opening up for ZZ Top. And my mum was with me in Australia. When she got out of the hospital, I was about 2 weeks old. She flew me over to Chicago to meet him for the first time. And so, I've really been on tour from birth.
Yeah.
And music has dominated my life, really. It's like my earliest memories are of Dad performing and seeing live music. So that's where the passion for performance comes from. My earliest memories are, standing side of stage at his shows, who knows where in the world, but, I was always there. I had like the kind of shooter's headphones on, side of stage, falling asleep in road cases and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I would always watch, I do remember watching Dad and thinking that's really cool, but my eyes would always be drawn to Tony Brock, who was the drummer. And that just looked fun. It looked like the most fun.
Yeah.
And, so my earliest memories are sitting on Tony Brock's lap in sound checks and, hitting around the drums with my hands. My feet wouldn't reach the pedals, so I remember him playing the feet. And that was really my introduction to music, watching and, learning off Tony, and then, seeing Dad's, prowess on the stage and seeing that kind of aggression, that passion, that kind of just relentless energy that he puts in, and that's, where I get it from. So it's really been there since day one. I had really kind of no choice, although, I've been fortunate to be given a lot of choice on what I want to do with my career and,
sure,
my education,
Going back to Tony Brock's drums, it's a big drum kit too, eh? Yeah, massive. Man, I'm a big Tony Brock fan. I remember listening to him the first time, I think it was Barnstorming.
Yep.
And I didn't know who he was at the time, and it wasn't until I actually came to Australia and the first covers band I ever played in Australia was actually a Cold Chisel covers band.
Okay.
Called Circus Animals, and we did a whole bunch of Chisel stuff, but we started learning some of your dad's solo stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd put a few of them in there, and I just remember having to learn those parts, and we used to play songs like "Got to Be With You Tonight," and oh man, and then when the where your dad did the soul music.
Yeah, Soul Deep, yeah.
Yeah, Soul Deep, Something Wrong With My Baby and River Deep, Mountain High, that stuff, oh man, just blew me away. And it was the guitarist in the band that told me, this guy, his name's Tony Brock.
Yeah, Tony's a beast, I still keep in touch with him. He's in LA and, obviously he'd come from the Babies before Dad and Rod Stewart's band. There's actually some really cool footage of him playing with Rod Stewart online, and so I keep in touch with him. He's done the Babies have reformed and done a new album. So yeah, he's still around and drumming in LA, and it's been great to keep in touch with him over the years. And he's obviously a huge influence on me as a drummer, and he was the guy that really introduced me to it.
Yeah. How long was he around through your childhood? I mean, how long was he in your dad's band, and were you sort of old enough at the time to take any lessons from him, like actual physical lessons, or was it more the sitting at the drum kit, sound check, that kind of thing?
It was like, it wasn't like kind of lessons as in like, rudiments and that kind of thing. It was more just he was passing on his wisdom, and just kind of, showing me where everything was, what they do. And, he was there as the drummer until really when we moved to France, which would have been 1993, 94. And that was when I got my first actual kind of lessons. Dad used a drummer called Neil Martin from the UK. And not only is he a phenomenal live drummer, but he's also an educator. So he was the first guy that really had me, working on technique and things like that. They're the earliest memories I have of actually kind of studying the drum set, and kind of that was where, I went from, just playing along to records to actually practicing things that were going to still benefit me, now as a professional drummer. Yeah.
What was some of the other music you're listening to?
Growing up, I kind of listened to really whatever Dad would play me. He introduced me to a lot of bands growing up. Some ones that really stand out for me, I really loved Soundgarden, still do. I was a huge Soundgarden fan growing up. I loved Pearl Jam, that album 10, when I was a kid. I was obsessed.
Game changer,
I was obsessed with it. So I really loved those two bands. But then, Dad would play a lot of soul to me. He'd play a lot of like Otis Redding and, all the old soul stuff. Obviously, he did Soul Deep around, when I was around 6 years old, I think it was. So that was, hearing that kind of music got me into soul and rhythm and blues and rock and roll. Obviously, Deep Purple were a huge influence on me early on. Led Zeppelin with Bonham. But, I've always been a huge Ian Pace fan. Dad introduced me to the Meters quite young, Zigaboo, who is, a legend for me, People always ask who your favorite drummer is, and it's really hard when you've had so many influences, but I guess if I could be a combination of Ian Pace and Zigaboo, that would be my perfect drummer.
Oh, man. That's a lot of notes played really, really loud.
But surprisingly not, loud, but not, loud just for the sake of being loud.
No, I know. Just that the imposed power, eh?
Yeah, and they've got a bit of jazz background as well, so there's a lot of that kind of improvisation and just kind of spontaneity in their drumming that I love.
Is Zigaboo still around these days?
Yeah. He's I think he lives in San Fran. I met him years ago, and so that was really cool. I met him at the NAMM show, still the only NAMM show I went to, which probably about 11 or 12 years ago, and I met him there, and he's, we send each other a message from time to time. He's a legend. And Ian Pace, Dad has known the Deep Purple guys for many years, and Ian's actually come over to the house, and I've had a few lessons with him, which was really fortunate as a young fella. So I was probably about 10 years old when I had a couple of lessons with him. So that was really cool. That was when Deep Purple were out in Australia, and Dad actually got up and sang with them in their encore at their show. Yeah.
Another drummer, obviously synonymous with your dad, is Steve Prestwich. Was he around much?
He was, obviously by the time I came along, Chisel were done, and they didn't see each other that often. But I did know Steve growing up and did see him, a fair amount. And I never really had lessons with him, but he was one of those guys like Tony that would always, whenever we were together, he would always impart some wisdom and just kind of, he would tell me stories and just talk about the drums. And I kind of really kind of got to know him better around the time Chisel reformed, which was 1998.
That was the last
album called Last Wave of Summer. Yep, exactly.
That's when I first and only time I got to see him play. It was at Kudos Bank Arena. It was called something else then, but
it at the Entertainment No, it was at the Entertainment Centre.
Yeah. Of course it was, because it was before the Olympics. But that was just awesome. We were up the top side of stage. I got to look, down at him and side on, hi hats. It's kind of facing me, and it was phenomenal. And this is around the time we'd been playing this Cold Chisel show for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
And of course I kind of got right into him trying to learn that music, trying to learn those parts and try and play them as authentically as I could,
Yep. Yeah, Steve, around that time, I was really kind of getting more serious with my drumming. I was going into high school, and, I was studying a lot and playing a lot of music. I'd already started playing in Dad's band. So I basically started around that time, right around I was about 12 or 13 years old. I would get up and play one song in Dad's show. And I would always be kind of asking, can I play 2 songs? Can I play 3 songs? And Dad was like, no, you're not ready yet. You're not ready.
Yeah.
But then they recorded that album. Steve was there. I remember actually he used one of my snare drums for that whole album, which was a DW Collector's Maple, I think, a 13-inch snare. He ended up borrowing that and using it on the whole record, which was cool. And, I got to hang out a lot with him during the recording of that album and kind of get to know him better, because obviously I was going into my teen years, so I was really kind of, I just was a sponge. I wanted to learn. And it was really sad that he passed. We miss him dearly. He was such a influential drummer for Australian music, and it's so sad that he died so young.
All right, let's go a little bit back to your school years, and you were talking about your studies. Were you actually starting to study music at that time, learning to read? Rudiments? Was there any local teachers that you were learning from at that stage?
Yep. So up until, we obviously, going back a bit, we moved to France in 93, 94, and I was playing drums then, but not really studying. When Neil, Dad's drummer, would be out at the house or we'd be on the road, he would give me lessons. But drums, I was really just playing for fun. Yep. I was actually studying piano already, so I'd learnt to read from about 6 or 7 years old. I was reading piano music, playing classical music. So when we got back to Australia in '96, I went into a school in Sydney, Cranbrook, and studied music from there on. And I was studying not only piano but drums, tune percussion, so orchestral percussion as well. Violin I was studying. I did like a year of bassoon as well. I think it was one of those things. If they said, "Oh, we need someone to play this obscure instrument in the orchestra," I would kind of pick it up just because I was always curious and I wanted to expand my horizons, so to speak. But in terms of drums, I from '96 until I graduated in 2003, I was studying with Tony Jex at Cranbrook, and Tony was great. He really kind of had a focus on reading, charting, following charts, playing different styles. He got me playing some big band, jazz, a lot of that sort of stuff, and he had a good focus on technique as well and on rudiments. So he was the first guy that really kind of upped the ante in terms of the technical side of the teaching. And I've a great appreciation for the time I spent with Tony learning. Yeah.
Mm. Was there school bands you were involved with at that stage?
Yeah. So there was mainly like concert bands, saxophone ensemble, various kind of like woodwind ensembles, percussion ensembles, in terms of the drumming and percussion. And we entered a lot of comps and won a lot of comps, performing arts ones. And I was also in the orchestra, first violinist, and I was giving concerts as a pianist as well.
Wow.
And I kind of got to I was doing singing as well. I was doing kind of operatic and theatre singing. So I was entering like Italian aria competitions, and I was kind of like involved in pretty much every part of the music department at that school that I could be. If there was something that I hadn't tried before, I would try it. And I was very close with a lot of the teachers in the music department there, and kind of it was one of those things that I was there more than I was in class.
Yeah, right. That's a good thing, though. I mean, it's obviously paid off.
Yeah, and I ended up being captain of music there in year 12, so that was a pleasure. And it was nice during year 12 to have younger students coming through that were really keen to get into music, and being able to take on that role as a bit of a kind of leader in the music department there. So that was nice. And then it obviously turned into professional life.
Yeah. You started playing in your dad's band as a keyboardist, is that right?
Yeah. So I outside of playing, the one song for from around 12, 13 years old. Yeah.
What was the song?
Hard to Handle, Otis Redding song.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. And I've always, loved that song. Dad played me a lot of Otis Redding growing up, so that was really cool. The opportunity came up to, I'd auditioned a couple of times for the drum seat and not gotten the gig. And, my dad would always say, "You're not ready yet, work harder." And so I'd go back, practice more, and and thinking back now, I much appreciate that he didn't throw me into the band before when he did, because he was right. I wasn't ready. I was, my drumming hadn't matured to the level that it needed to be at, and obviously, didn't want to just get it because I was his son. I wanted to earn it.
Yep.
So I kind of hit a crossroad when I finished high school, because like I said, I was involved in a lot of different parts of the music department. I was kind of thinking of going to the con and studying to be a concert pianist. So that was one route which was kind of open. I was playing first grade cricket, so that was another route that was interesting to me. I was playing professional football as well as a goalkeeper, and I actually went over to Scotland for a season and trained and played. And then I was also drumming. I was doing tours in between that. So it was one of those things. I was kind of dividing my time, and most of those different groups were all saying, "Oh, well, you have to really
pick one." Yeah,
pick one. And then the opportunity came up where Dad needed a keyboard player, and I've always been and I still say this now, I've always been a classically trained pianist, so I don't have that kind of what do you call it, the improvisational ability that some of the great keyboard players that he's have, but I was able to learn the parts, play them, be solid, and I did a couple of tours as the keyboard player, which was fun. I mean, I wouldn't say it was really my comfort zone, but it was one of those things I was happy to help out at the time.
Right.
And then the drum seat became available shortly thereafter.
So who was playing drums at that stage?
Warren Trout.
Oh, okay, right, cool, awesome.
Yeah,
there's another monster.
Monster,
you've been,
and another great influence on me.
Yeah, yep. I have him on my list here as drummers that were around that, and I'm sure would have been an influence. Like, I mean, obviously, we're just talking about Tony Brock and Steve Prestwich, and I had Warren on here, and Joe Acaria was around a little bit too. So monsters all around, man.
Yeah, no, was it? He's a great bloke, and someone who I look up to very much so, and he's a great guy, a great friend, and he was a great influence on me at that time. Like I remember just before that, we would be in the studio, and he was helping me out with technique as well, and giving me advice on live performance. So I didn't take that for granted at all. When I stepped in there, I wanted to make sure that I was up for it. Yeah. So, eventually when I got the drum seat, Dad finally said, "You're ready. I'm going to give you a go. And it's up to you to make that your seat." And so that was the challenge he threw out to me. So,
right. So walk us through a drum chair audition for Jimmy Barnes.
Well, it's really just he gets the band into the studio, and he just kind of says, "Let's play." And usually he'll kind of run through a kind of mock set, and just kind of you just have to play it with the ferocity that you would a live show.
Right.
And you also have to gel with the musicians, and you have to, obviously get along with him as well. And luckily, having grown up in that circle, all of the people that were in the band were all friends, and they were all people that I know really well. And obviously Dad is, he's my best friend. So we've always had a connection. And, I know him more than most people do, and know him musically as well. So it's one of those things, I know what he's kind of thinking when he's running around the stage, and where he's going to go and what he's going to do. And, I kind of use that to my advantage, use that to kind of drive the show along. And I know how tough he is, and how much of a perfectionist he is, because I'm the same.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's really cool, man. I mean, I've worked for most of my career in my trade with my father.
Yeah.
And I had situations where, like the different places we'd go and work at, we wouldn't know everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So I would quite often, being the son of, my father, and quite often my father would be in a like a supervisor's role or something, and I'd be there. Man, did I get tested, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it sounds like you probably didn't have to go through that, which is good. I mean, what I mean by tested is tested by, not by my father. Of course, my father's going to, test me, and he knows that I do my job, but it was the other people in the workplace that would test me,
Oh, no, I've definitely had that, yeah. I've been
right?
pulled aside. I've been pulled aside by some very, competent musicians and people that I, and I won't name names, but I have been pulled aside and told, yeah, you need to really work your ass off for this, because, maybe someone else deserves this more than you. And I was like, well, I don't believe that's the case, but, I have faced that, and obviously in those times it wasn't really kind of a social media driven business like it is now.
Yep.
But there was like forums and stuff where I would read quite nasty things said about me, about, you know, you only got the gig because you're his son and stuff like that, you know. So that was a big factor in leading me towards Berklee. Because I'd already been in the band for a few years when I decided to audition for Berklee College of Music in Boston, which is, you know, one of the best and biggest music schools in the world.
Yep.
That came about from conversations with two people. One was Tal Wilkenfeld, the bass player, and the other was Michael Hegarty, also the bass player, Dad's bass player. And they had both, you know, just suggested, maybe you should go to the States and study and expand your knowledge, expand your horizons. And so I took that on as a challenge to, you know, prove not only to all the people that were, you know, maybe doubting my worth in that band, to also proving to myself that I deserved to be there, and making a name for myself outside of Dad's band. So I wanted to, you know, go somewhere where I was anonymous and could develop without that pressure. And that was what Berklee was for me. That was, you know, I took a step away from touring. I not altogether, but I did step back from touring, obviously, because I was studying full time, but I was touring in the holidays and in the breaks from studying. So, you know, I did keep my gig, but yeah, though, you know, other drummers were touring with Dad when I was at school, and you know, I was very lucky that Dad was open to that. He was open, and he was actually very, very proud that I kind of made that decision, and he was happy to support my development, and he was really, you know, he said, look, he you know, he's always been a huge supporter of me, and he was already happy with the way I was playing the gig, but, you know, he could obviously see that I had the drive to improve and get better, and he said, look, you've already earned your spot in my band. When you come back, it'll still be your spot, you know, so you've got nothing to prove, but I'm proud that you're trying to prove more. Yeah.
That's cool. All right, let's talk a little bit about Berklee.
Yeah.
I had A. Browns on the podcast at the start of the year when he was back in Sydney. You went there around the same time he was. You probably there a bit earlier than him, eh?
I was there earlier, and it's funny because back when Tatler's Jams was still a thing in Sydney, I remember Abe as a real young fella. He came up and he asked me about Berklee.
Oh, right.
And so I had a good long chat with him at Tatler's about Berklee and how much I loved it there. And I'm so happy that he, you know, was able to go there and that he's had such great success, because he's a beautiful guy and an incredible drummer, incredible musician.
Just musician now, yeah, not just the drummer. Like, you know, beautiful singer, great bass player, songwriter, composer, just doing it all. He's killing it, man.
Yeah, makes you real proud, you know, because when I went to Berklee, it was kind of not as accessible as it is now to Australian musicians. The Berklee World Scholarship Tour didn't come to Australia at the time, so they didn't come here and audition students. So I had to go. I went to Boston to audition.
Right. Yeah, because Abe auditioned here, didn't he?
Yeah. I believe so. Anyway, I do. Yeah. And that was one of the things when I finished at Berklee. That was one of the real things I kind of, you know, I'd established quite a good relationship with Roger Brown, the dean, like the head of Berklee. And I said to him, look, there's so many great young musicians in Australia. You know, you go to places like Indonesia, Malaysia, Japan. Why not come to Australia as well? It's so close if they're already there. And so, you know, that was one of the things that I was able to leave Berklee with, was that kind of helping set up that.
Oh, great.
For Australian students to have access to. So, but, you know, I wouldn't change how it all went for me, because, you know, going over to Berklee to audition was a crazy time, and it was a wonderful experience. I stopped in New York on the way, and I met up with Tal Wilkenfeld, and she was doing a gig, and I stayed there in New York for a couple of nights before I had to go up to Berklee, and this is a cool story. Cool. So I'd kind of researched the teachers and that were at Berklee before I went, and I was kind of excited to learn off certain teachers. And one of the ones that I was really excited to study with was Kenwood Denard. And for anyone out there, if you don't know who Kenwood is, you should. He was Jaco Pastorius's drummer, along with many others, and he is a long time professor at Berklee, and so he was one of the guys I was really excited to meet and kind of get to know. And so I was with Tal before her show, and she was like, "Oh, I'm going to introduce you to a few friends of mine that are coming to the show." And I was like, "Okay, cool." So I get to this gig. I can't remember what the venue was, but she introduced me to Kenwood. So Kenwood was there, and Omar Hakim was there. And so I was sitting between Kenwood Denard and Omar Hakim and Anthony Jackson, great bass player.
Yeah.
And so I was sitting with those three in the front row of her gig, kind of just like going, wow, this is really why I left Australia and came over here, was to, just kind of sit in a gig with legends like this. Anyway, so Omar was a cool guy. Anthony was cool, but I really kind of hit it off with Kenwood. We sparked a friendship that, lasts to this day. We keep in touch. He's still a close friend. But we kind of ended up kind of drinking after the show and kind of hanging out. And eventually it kind of got to about kind of 1 a.m. or something. And Cameron went, "Oh, I've got to get the bus back to Boston." I was like, I kind of realized, shit, I have to too. And so it turned out we were on the same bus.
Right. So
we were on the 2 a.m. Chinatown, New York to Chinatown, Boston bus, which was it cost about $12 or something at the time. And it took 4 hours. So we got into Boston about 6 a.m. And I knew my audition was at 10 a.m. Oh. So I kind of went and kind of gathered myself and kind of got ready. And anyway, so I go, and I know I've got my audition, and usually there's like 2 or 3 teachers in there that kind of test you on certain things just to kind of see what level you're at and stuff like that. And I walked in, and Kenwood he happened to be auditioning me. And so I'd spoken to him the night before how, I was really nervous about it. And he said, "Look, having spent the night with you kind of hanging out, I mean, I haven't seen you play drums, but I know you're going to be all right." And that was really kind of settled my nerves. And when I walked in and saw that he was auditioning me, that was really it was cool. He just gave me a kind of smile and a nod. And then it was kind of like he was, I played some stuff for him and whatnot. And that was the start of a wonderful friendship, So the whole 3.5 years I was at Berklee, I would spend maybe 2-3 hours with him every week. We would go to Pad Thai Cafe, a little Thai place that was out, just around the corner from the main building at Berklee. And then we'd go back to his office where he had a few drum sets and lots of records and stuff like that. And we would just talk for hours. Sometimes it would be a couple of hours. Sometimes it would be 3-4 hours. And, he'd come to my shows. We would just, he was just a really good friend and a really great mentor. So that was how, that was the start of Berklee for me. And then, it really was a melting pot it really was the perfect place for me because, I'm really crazy about music.
Yep.
I was really wanting to immerse myself in it. And you're in an environment where everyone's as crazy as you.
Yeah.
And everyone was just hungry to make as much music and as much different music as possible. So I went from a meat and potatoes rock drummer, obviously with an eclectic music taste, but my music taste became even more eclectic. So I was, jamming with funk bands, like playing Latin stuff. I was in like African ensembles and just really just playing as much different stuff as I could, and that was where I really kind of started to see musical styles as languages.
Right.
And so what Berklee gave me was a good vocabulary in a lot of languages. And since then I've kind of made it my kind of life goal to travel to as many of these places and, learn more about the culture and the music, so wherever I go in the world, whether it's a Western or, Eastern country, no matter, or South America, or wherever. I'm, trying to find some traditional music. I'm trying to collect some traditional instruments. I'm trying to meet local musicians. And for the most part, when I go there, there's usually someone there that I went to Berklee with. So that's another cool part of my Berklee experience, is that network, no matter where I go, there's someone there that I can have a good hang with and make some music with. Yeah.
That's cool. Abe talked about when he would go to the practice rooms.
Yeah.
There's like this whole lot of practice rooms there, and you only had so much time to practice, but he would literally have people standing right in front of him, waiting for their turn while he was practicing. Did you? Yeah. Was it like that for you there?
Yeah, it was crazy. You had this kind of one of the main practice rooms for the drummers. Berklee's. I haven't been back in many years, but it's changed a lot apparently. But when I was there, you would kind of give your student ID. You'd sign in for an hour, and if it was busy, you'd get an hour. If it wasn't busy, you could usually get a few hours in, or you could sign up again and go back in. But it's one of the things. You go down in the basement, and there were all these little kind of fabricated little kind of solo drum rooms. It was basically like a meter and a half by a meter and a half little kind of tiny soundproof kind of thing that had been put in. And there were probably about 20 of them. So there were about 20 kits in it, and you could hear them all. Like once you're in your little kind of box and you had your headphones on, you were good. But if you were walking around, or you were the student that worked there signing people in, it would be the worst job ever, because you could hear just like, it's like if you're standing outside someone's garage and they're playing. It was like that, but 20 of them. But what was like, it was kind of cool. It was cool because we would have hangs down there. We would like, you'd be sweating, so you'd kind of get out and get some air because they weren't really well ventilated. And you'd kind of walk around and you just kind of check out other drummers. And that was the thing. Like it wasn't necessarily people saying, "Oh, I'm next. You got to get out." It was more whenever you would take your break, everyone would walk around and watch each other, and you'd kind of draw different influences. Right. Like I would, like one of the guys who was quite often practicing when I was there was a guy called Matt Gasker, who's made a huge name now. He's huge. And we were students together, and we were mates. And so, I'd go and see him shedding something, go, "Oh man, that was a cool thing." And then I'd say, what was that? The cool thing about Berklee was that it wasn't so much a competitive thing. Like you could just knock on the door or open the door and say, "Hey bro, what was that you played?" Like that was cool.
Yeah, cool.
And then, I learned as much off the other students as I did from the teachers. And that was the environment that they've set up there. And then, it wasn't unusual for you to be in a practice room and suddenly someone really famous walks past and stops and looks in. So I remember I was like, I was practicing some stuff. And, the thing about practice is it's not, if you're practicing stuff and you're nailing it every time, you're not practicing right, because you should be trying stuff that you make mistakes and you want to be challenging yourself. So that what I was doing, I was having one of these sessions where I was kind of struggling with this lick that I was trying. And John Blackwell Jr. I looked up and he was just standing at the window, just like staring in. He wasn't smiling. He was just like staring in. I was like, I don't know if I can swear on this, but I was like, fuck.
You can, man.
I was like, fuck, like he's looking scary, man.
He was a scary looking dude, eh?
No, he was an absolute sweetheart, and it turned out. And he, so after I got up and I opened the door and I kind of like said hello, and he was like, "Oh man, I like what you're playing now." I was like, "Oh man, I'm kind of making a lot of mistakes and messing up." He goes, "Yeah, that's what it's about." And yeah, so guys like that would just kind of turn up that were, Berklee grads or were in Boston on tour. They would kind of, float around. I can remember I was in a rehearsal with an ensemble, and J.R. Robinson just like poked his head in, and he came in and just like, "I just want to sit in and listen." And I was like, wow, this is like, and that, there is why I went to Berklee, was to have access to that caliber of teacher and that caliber of musician, just coming in all the time. Within the first month of being at Berklee, I saw and met Steve Gadd at a clinic. I saw and met Stanton Moore at a clinic, and I saw and met Mike Clark at a clinic. So these are guys that might not come to Australia ever, or if they do, it's once in 20 years. So that caliber of clinician were coming through on a monthly basis there. So it was pretty special. Yeah.
Yeah. I was looking at the list of teachers that were there, and Rod Morgenstein was that, right? So when I was still living in New Zealand, I used to live in a town called Masterton, which is about an hour and a half from Wellington.
Yeah, I've been there.
So every couple of years, a drummer would come into Wellington and do a clinic. And the first one I saw was Dom Familaro, so went down and saw him. And then, Rod Morgenstein came, and he had the full drum kit set up, the left-handed.
Yep.
It was blue Premier kit he had at the time, and he was there for Sabian cymbals.
Yep.
And man, he's blew my mind. What a player!
What a player. And one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Rod was I studied with him for a semester, maybe 2 semesters, and he was wonderful. It was funny because I walked in and he's a lefty and plays on a left-handed kit, and he was like, I want you to start. Don't have to focus on it, but he wanted me to practice playing on a left-handed kit, and he's like, well, learn what the basics of what you do with your right foot on your left foot as well. And I was kind of like, why do I need to do that? And he said, you just never know when you'll need it. And, fast forward years later, I was on tour with the 10 Tenors, and they whoever had set up this particular show in Germany hadn't rigged the stage properly, and my steps collapsed as I was walking up onto the stage, and I broke my ankle. And so I did the first couple of, first week or two of shows playing on the left pedal, on the slave pedal of the doubles, right? With my hats just closed, and I had my right foot in an ice bucket. So I sent Rod a message after that and said, thanks for pushing that in the lessons, because I appreciate it. And it's one of those things, you might be playing a gig and your chain snaps or your beater breaks or something, and you have to switch over to the left pedal, and you can get through it.
Yep.
I think back to my first gig with my dad as a young fella, which was a bit of a nightmare, to be honest, because my the bass drum pedal that I'd used on that gig, which was it was one of the original DW 5000s. Single pedal, and it hadn't been well maintained, and I can remember in the first song it just fell apart and didn't have a backup, so I played the rest of the show on the floor tom as the bass drum. It was just whereas if you got a double pedal, you can just switch to that left pedal and you can get through, so I've always learnt to have spares of everything.
Yeah, that's cool.
But Rod was a great teacher. But the biggest influence on me at Berklee, outside of Kenwood, Kenwood was more of a mentor, and I didn't really take like private lessons with him, but at the same time, I spent a lot of time with him just hanging. But in terms of the teachers that I actually studied with, no one had a bigger influence on me than Dave DeCenzo. And everyone out there, if you don't know Dave, he's incredible. He's played with an amazing array of artists, and he's just an incredible teacher as well. He has a couple of books that are really, really great books, and he's always posting little videos to do with those books online. And he's one of those guys I still keep in touch with. And he's just an incredible drummer, incredibly musical and incredibly expressive. So he was the guy who I spent the bulk of my Berklee time studying privately off. But there were other drum teachers there that were also incredible. I hope I don't forget anyone, but Casey Sherrill, Bob Tamani, Jamie Haddad, who's been Paul Simon's percussionist since the early days, and learned some incredible stuff off him. Tony Thunder Smith, who was Lou Reed's drummer.
Right. Was Terry Lynn Carrington there at the time, or
she was? I never really studied with her.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, she was. It was one of those. I was friendly with her towards the latter stages of my Berklee experience, but she was very intimidating I found her very intimidating to talk to. Right. And she wasn't always the friendliest with me, but later on she was fine. But I found her very intimidating. But I did watch her play a lot while I was there, and she's incredible. Yeah, so many teachers there. Steve Wilkes, I did an amazing studio drumming class with him. Joe Galeota, who's like my, he's like a drum brother to me. He was the chair of the African music department, and he took me to Ghana and got me into, wow. He helped me develop my kind of world drumming, and the beauty of this is these are all. They're not just my teachers; they're my friends.
Yep.
I came away from Berklee with a degree, and just a whole new world of friends. These guys are all people I respect, admire, and I'll keep in touch with them, for the rest of my life. So yeah, I can't stress enough how important Berklee was in my development as a musician and as a human. Just so many wonderful people, so many wonderful musicians, and and I'm really proud of the success that a lot of my friends have found since graduating. Yeah, so yeah.
Just going back to Matt Gasker, back then, was he like? I mean, because he's just a phenom, man. He's just incredible. The stuff he does is, just blows my mind. I don't think there's too many, in my opinion, too many drummers that kind of play like that and phrase like that.
Yeah.
Did you kind of get that idea from him?
It was funny. When I first met Matt, we were taking it was like a pop rock drum class with Mike Mangini. It was like a rock drum styles lab. We called them labs because, you'd go in, there'd be, 10 drum sets in the room and the teacher's drum set. He would sit at it, play something, and you'd all have turns or you'd play stuff together. And Matt was in that class with me. And I just remember him he was just a chill dude. He was it wasn't one of those classes where you could be particularly showy. So I didn't get the idea of what, I didn't really get the idea of what technical ability he had, because we were really doing a bit more of the kind of basic rock stuff. But, I can definitely tell you he practiced an insane amount, much more than me. He was so dedicated, and he was always talented, man. And he just took it. The thing with Matt is he's always wanting to take it to the next level. Like he's always like, the last time I saw him, he was telling me how, he was like, oh man, and he's already playing incredible shit. And I'm like, he's like, I don't know, like, I feel like I need to do more. And I'm like, dude, you're already incredible. And that's, that's the curse of being the way we are, wanting to, excel. You always want to take the next step and get better, which is it's a great trait to have. But yeah, he's insane. He's a good bloke, incredible drummer. He works incredibly hard. Practices like a mofo. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so Berklee ends. You leave Berklee. What did you have lined up when you got back? Did you stay in the States for a bit, or did you come home?
I had the option of staying in the States. When you finish at Berklee, they give you a year work visa.
Yeah.
It's called an OPT, so an optional practical training visa. I looked into that and wanted to do that, but I had about a 3-4 month tour lined up with Dad at the end of that. And one of the criteria for the OPT was you can't leave the States for, I think it was more than like 30 days within the year or something. Wow. And I was gonna be away for the first 3 months, so I opted out of that. And I went back on the road with Dad, but I came back as a completely evolved drummer to what I was when I went over there. And it was like, guys like Wazza T, Warren Trout, I remember him telling me when I got back from Berklee how much I'd improved. And, it was really nice to hear because I really worked a lot over there to get better. Then that was around the time I signed with Tama. So I recorded a record with Dad in LA where the bulk of the drumming was done by Kenny Aronoff. And it was one of those things. There was a bit of a kick in the guts because I had been told, "Oh, you're coming over to do this record. You and Kenny will be splitting the recording." And when I got there, Don Gaiman, the producer, pulled me aside and said, "Look, I know you've been told a certain thing, but I trust Kenny more than you, and you're here to learn. So watch and learn." And I'd gone there, as Dad's drummer, as I'd just graduated. I was kind of like, I felt like I was, I'd earned that, and then I was kind of like, I bit my tongue a bit, and I was like, don't react. And so I sat and watched Kenny, and Kenny's incredible. Yeah. And I got along with Kenny like a house on fire. We hung out. Everyone would leave the studio, and we'd stay back and I was kind of showing him African percussion, and we were just geeking out and just talking drums. So I kind of made a positive out of that. That was the album Rage and Ruin. And it finally got to about the kind of 7th or 8th day of recording. And Kenny came up to me and goes, "Oh, it's your turn. You've got a track. Go on, man." He goes, I believe in you. And, it was one of those things. I remember I had the cans on and I could hear Don Gaiman talking over the talkback, talking to Mark Durnley, who was the assistant engineer, and he said, because obviously Kenny's a powerhouse and he's an animal, and I can remember hearing Don saying, we're gonna have to watch the levels here because I don't know if he's got the power that Kenny does, and I don't know if he meant for me to
Game
hear
on
that, but I heard that and I was like, "Oh, you motherfucker!"
Yeah. Game on.
So then he goes, "Oh, okay, Jackie, can you play something for me?" And so I played a groove, and he goes, "Oh, we're not going to have a problem here."
Good.
And I played that one track that I got on the album, and I nailed it, and I did a lot of vocal arrangements and kind of stuff for the album, other like percussion. So I've contributed a lot more than apart from the drums, and it was one of those things. By the end of the recording process, Don pulled me aside and said, I'm really proud of how you've taken this on and taken on the advice, and I would hire you anytime.
Cool.
So that was nice. And I've, Don is he's a close family friend, so he's known me since I was a little kid, because he produced some of Dad's biggest albums in the early 90s, and so when I was going to LA at the time, I was staying with Don and his family, so yes, it was a kick in the guts to hear that from him, but I have a great amount of respect for him, and that was why I chose not to react to it, and I chose to work my ass off and just try and impress him and just show him that I had had what it takes. And to hear that validation at the end of that record was really, really cool. And then obviously Kenny got me he introduced me to the head of Tama in LA, and that led to conversations to Tama in Australia, and that's 10 years this year that I've been a Tama artist. So I have Kenny to thank for reintroducing me to Tama, because obviously I grew up playing Tamas with Tony Brock, and then I spent a number of years with Pearl drums, and then when the opportunity came to sign with Tama, it was like a kind of homecoming, because they were like the sound that I kind of knew from when I was a kid.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was one of those things, when I sat at those drums, they felt comfortable. and they felt punchy. They felt kind of big sounding, and their hardware is just unbreakable.
Right.
I've broken some things, but they're for the most part unbreakable.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah,
Really cool. So when did the 10 tenors thing come about?
yeah. So it came out of the blue. Okay, so the cool thing was I went back to Berklee actually, and I took my mum and dad. So I'd introduced, that album Rage and Ruin, I'd introduced Dad to one of my songwriting teachers, Mark Simos. And he actually came out to Australia, did some songwriting seminars, and he co-wrote half of that album with Dad, and I co-wrote a song with the both of them. So that was really cool. Then Mark had kind of suggested, we should bring your dad to Berklee. And I thought that would be a cool idea. And my dad is one of those guys, he grew up in poverty and had no education in anything really, let alone music. So he hadn't studied music. He didn't know how to read music and any of that. And so we kind of we did this cool thing where we went to Berklee, Mum, Dad, and I. Dad and I taught an ensemble for a semester. And the trade-off for that was Dad and Mum got to study at Berklee for a semester.
Oh, wow.
So that was the first time in my dad's adult life that he'd studied. And I could, it was really awesome. We were staying in this apartment in Boston, and, my mum and dad would go out the door in the morning with their books and come back with folders of stuff, and I'd be helping them with work. And then, Dad and I would go to this ensemble where there were these young kids, and we were basically teaching them about putting together bands. Right. It was an Australian music ensemble. So Dad got to, these were guys who knew of his music and wanted to sing his music, and he kind of mentored the singers and I mentored the band. So it was really cool to be back at Berklee on the other side, kind of seeing it from a teacher's standpoint, and getting that perspective on Berklee, which was really cool. Anyway, I was in our apartment in Boston, and I got a call out of the blue from, I'm trying to remember who it was, but he'd tech for us, and he said, I've got a manager of a group called the 10 Tenors asked about a drummer, and I suggested you, and do you mind if I put you in touch? And at that point I didn't really know who they were. I'd heard the name, but not really kind of, I'd not really kind of heard about them much. But, then I looked up on YouTube and I was like, they're doing some pretty big shows and it's a pretty epic show. So I spoke to the manager on Skype from my apartment in Boston. And he was just like, this was, would have been the end of the year because it was a fall semester. And he was like, you've got about a month until you have to come up and rehearse. So are you in or you out? And he sent me the contracts that straight after that Skype meeting, and I'd signed a contract with the 10 Tenors the next day. So I got back to Australia at the end of the semester, and I met up with Michael Manicus, the MD at the time. So we met up and he gave me all the charts, and then I flew up to Brisbane. This is before I called Brisbane home, but I flew up to Brisbane, stayed there, and did the rehearsals, and then we were out to Europe, and it was, it was a crazy time. It was like something like 150 shows in like the space of 6 months or something, and Jeez. We had shows around Europe, about 70 shows in Germany alone, I think, something like that. It was. Yeah, that was a cool gig for me because it was a challenge. It was the first gig I'd ever had where I had to read charts, and obviously I'd spent a lot of years studying theory and whatnot, but that was the first gig where I had to really play specific parts, because they didn't tour with the bass player. They toured with a guitarist and a keyboard player who was the MD and drums, and the bass and orchestra were all tracked to click. And so I had that in my head, so I had to be really precise with what I was playing. It wasn't the kind of gig where you could move around and kind of, you had like the tempos were automated, so if the song slowed down, the click would as well. So you had to really just that was a real great experience for me because the reading factor, and then the stylistically as well, playing a mixture of pop, classical, orchestral. So you're playing sometimes orchestral parts on some toms or something, and having to come up with those flavors to make it not just a pop rock gig. And then also, I was in a Perspex cage as well for the sound.
Was that the first time you'd done that?
It wasn't. It was around the second or third time. I'd done a couple of DVDs with Dad and recordings where we had strings and stuff like that where I was in Perspex, but that was the first time I'd been in a like an actual Perspex box. So there's a photo on my Facebook from a gig we did in Bangkok where we played. I think it was a Moscow Symphony Orchestra came out, or one of the big orchestras from Moscow came out, and it was a bit of a nightmare playing along with them because we had the conductor and I still had the click in my head and the conductor had the click, but they didn't have enough sends to send the click around to all the orchestra. So, and then it was like a 90-piece orchestra or something. And so they the only way they could contain me was to build that. I literally had to get onto the kit, and they built a Perspex box around me, and I was fully closed in. And when I had to get out, they would take a panel off and I would get out, and then they put the panel back on. But that was a very cool experience. That was they're lifelong friends that I've made in the 10-10ers as well. Great people. I really enjoyed my time working with them, and it's one of those things. You never say never. It's one of those things. I've never liked to burn any bridges. So I've moved on from gigs, but I've always moved on in a way that if an opportunity arises, I could do it again.
That's cool.
And if they would ever call me up and say, "Oh, do you want to do something?" Whether it's 1 or 2 shows or a whole tour, absolutely, I'd be open to it. So that was a great experience, and they're still some of my best friends from those tours.
That's great. So around what year was that?
That would have been 2012, 2013. Yeah, because my first daughter was born while I was on that, or she was. My wife was pregnant while I was on that first big tour. So started 2013. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you obviously came home came back to Australia to be with your kid. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. I missed a lot of that pregnancy, but that's the sacrifice we make to pay the bills and put food on the table for your family, and that's this is my full-time job. So there are times where I'm away for a long time, but I was never going to miss the birth. That was for sure. And luckily, it did fall in between tours anyway. So.
Right. Okay. So what we're just trying to stay a little bit on the timeline, a little bit, just to try and lead up. So, what sort of came about after that? Was it the probably was that around the time of Dead Daisies?
Probably Dead Daisies. Yeah. So
okay.
Dead Daisies. David Lowy I'd known for a long time. I'd actually gone and I did some jamming with him at his house, and this is before Dead Daisies, but he, David Lowy is a, incredibly successful businessman with the Westfield Group. And his kind of side gig was music. He always wanted to be a musician. And if you look at him, he's got the long hair and the look. He doesn't look like your average businessman. And he kind of, he's always wanted to kind of put super groups together, and he did that, and it's kind of been Dead Daisies has been one of those bands that's kind of like got a bit of a revolving door.
Revolving door, yeah. It's kind of reading a little bit about them last night.
Yeah. They're kind of it's always been an eclectic mix of musicians, usually with some sort of profile. And I got the call. So they had done a tour opening up for Dad, which I was on. And that was with John Stevens singing, and John Tempesta was the drummer. So that was
from the Cult.
Yeah, so that's where I got to know John, and John's a dear friend. He's a absolute monster. But obviously, I think there was some scheduling things with the Cult after that tour, and he stepped aside, and they got Brian Tishy in as the drummer. And then Brian, I think he was he has some like side businesses in the States, like some tribute shows that are big money makers for him. And I think that coincided with the recording of their album. And then they got a new singer as well. And they approached me and said, "Oh, Brian can't do the record. They're going to record the album in Sydney. Will you do it?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah." So at the time it was who was in it? Marco Mendoza was playing bass. And Marco's incredible. He's played with everyone. Whitesnake, Thin Lizzy, and many others, So he's and he's a cracking bloke. He's hilarious. So it was great to play with him. Dizzy Reed from Guns N' Roses, the piano player.
Yep.
Richard Fortus from Guns N' Roses as well on guitar. And John Corabi singing. Yeah. And then David Lowy on rhythm guitar. And so, we went into 301 and they kind of wrote the songs on the fly, and I was
cool.
there. I was just there as the drummer and percussion and backing vocals and whatnot. And yeah, that was really cool. It's a pretty epic sounding album. There were like something like 2 songs on the record that Brian had previously recorded that they put on the record, and then the rest is all me. So there's even a song that Dad wrote with Glenn Hughes that they put forward for the album and ended up doing it as a duet with John Corabi. So that's cool. So Dad's on that record. It's called Revolution. It was all based around them going back to. They were one of the first bands to go to Cuba when they opened up the borders and
is that right?
to American bands and stuff. So that was why that was called that. And I think one of the tracks that Brian had recorded on, they recorded on that trip to Cuba. But yeah, so it's the Dead Daisies. That's another band. I know all those guys really well. Glenn Hughes is now singing and playing bass, and I think Doug Aldridge is on guitar. Dean Castronovo is on drums. Yeah, so it's one of those. I got asked a couple of years ago if I could fill in for Dean, but it didn't work out. So I was asked to hold some dates, and it's one of those things. Like we bump into each other around, and if something were to come up in the future, I'm sure I'd make some music with them in some capacity in the future. Who knows? Yeah. But that was a cool album to be a part of. That was 2015. I'm trying to think what came next in my career. Could be. I did. I made an EP of my own.
Did you? Just before we talk, because I have got down here to talk about if you had solo music.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk about Dean Castronovo a little bit. Like I noticed that Jonathan Cain and Neil Schon, family friends of you guys, and one of your early, one of your dad's early records, they were sort of a part of. So it was kind of funny, like reading that and then seeing the Dead Daisies and the Dean Castronovo thing. It's all sort of.
It's all
connected, eh? Yeah.
And now that you mention Jonathan Cain and Neil Schon, I forgot to mention that around that just after the Dead Daisies record, I went to the States and recorded with them. It was around that time because we were doing the 30-30 record for Dad, which was his 30th anniversary of being a solo performer. So it was either late 2014 or early 2015. I can't remember. But I was in the States and I did a track with Neil Schon and Jonathan Cain and Joe Bonamassa as well.
Yeah, I was watching the video of that today.
Yeah, so that was cool. And then we did a track with Keith Urban as well, which was great fun as well. And then who else? We did, we did some stuff back in Australia. We did one with Little Steve Van Zandt from Bruce Springsteen's band, from the E Street Band. Yep. And Little Steven is awesome. He's such a funny guy. And, I've been fortunate to catch up with him on a bunch of festivals in the past few years, and it's always a good time. It's always a good hang. And he has an incredible band. Then, John Stevens. We did something with Tina Arena. We did a bunch of different features on that record, which was really cool. So that was a fun album to make, and it was fun to, because obviously Neil and Jonathan played a big part in, Dad's music in the 80s and around the time I was born, Freight Train Hard in particular, and also Working Class Man as well, yeah. So those couple of records were really, strongly influenced by those guys. And so for them I think it was cool to play with me because obviously they'd seen me as an infant. And then the next they see me, I'm in the band playing the drums. And so that was cool.
That's cool. Yeah.
That was good fun. Yeah. But yeah, Dean, I've only met Dean once. And we were on tour with Dad in Europe 2 years ago or a year and a half ago or something like that. And they happened to be playing the same town and they happened to be staying at the same hotel. And so I caught up with all of them, and that was when I met Dean for the first time. And he was a sweetheart. Obviously, he went through a pretty bad thing to do with drugs, and that's one of those things. A lot of the guys have gone through really bad shit when it comes to hard drugs, and fortunately for him, he got the help he needed, and he seems to have turned his life around, which is a good thing. And he's making music again, which that's all you ask.
That's great. But it's also, and the flip side of that too is it's so great to see Steve Smith playing with Journey again. Yeah, he's one of my favourite drummers for sure.
Yeah, okay, I've got a bit. It's just a very short Steve Smith story.
Cool.
But I can remember that I told you I've been to one NAMM show, and I was a young upcoming drummer at the time, and I've been signed with Zildjian for my whole career, and at the time the head of A&R was John DeChristopher, and his assistant was a young lady, Sarah. She's now Sarah Hagen, since she got married, and she was really supportive of me as a young drummer when I got to Berklee, because obviously Zildjian company is based in Boston or just outside Boston, so. I would always be welcome to come into the factory and look at cymbals being made and handpick some cymbals from the drummer's vault. And when I went to NAMM show, I went around to all the different sponsors that looked after me, and Zildjian were the ones that really treated me like family. And they were doing an artist signing this particular day that I was there, and they said, "Oh, jump in and sign some stuff." I'm like, "Oh, well, no one knows who the fuck I am." Like, there's no point. And she was like, "No, just sit down there. Sit there. There's a seat right there." So I sat down and I was sitting between Steve Smith and Max Weinberg. So it was kind of like just a drummer signing session, and people were walking past me like left, right, and center and not knowing who I was. And I was just like, and then, Steve and Max would kind of like eventually like, "Oh, this is Jackie from Australia, get his signature now. You'll want it one day." And well, we're still waiting for that day, but
it's coming. It's coming. Bro.
But they were really, I was just a young upcoming drummer then, and they were really, welcoming to me, and made me feel less nervous. Yeah, so it was nice to meet him then, and yeah, he's obviously a legendary drummer and phenomenal. So it's just one of those cool experiences. Yeah.
That's really cool. It sounds like you've had a few of them. That's really cool.
Yeah.
All right. So back in Australia now, you're full-time touring with your dad, and you're also playing with the Lockie Doley group, which you were talking about a little bit earlier, which you've been playing with for a number of years now.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's a band where you can really open up. And before we talk a little bit about that, I want to ask, when you like in your dad's band, are you given room to express yourself when you're playing, or are you pretty confined to the? I'm not talking about going outside the structures of the song, but
yeah.
Do you know what I mean by that question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, with Dad, it's I'm given the artistic freedom if I want it, but But what I've learned is that, you have to do what the song requires and what the show requires.
Cool.
And that's not necessarily the place for it. Like My job in that band is to be the relentless, freight train, the kind of, just kind of be the, the engine room. I've just got to keep the groove and keep the pocket there. It's just got to be that relentless pocket.
Gotcha.
And, so I do take artistic freedoms. I throw little things in here and there. Occasionally Dad will notice and he'll turn around and kind of give me a look. But I don't do
Does he give you
anything.
does he give you a look like, nah, it didn't work, bro?
Both. He gives, if it doesn't, he gives it a certain look, and if it works, he'll give a different look. And it's one of those things. It's
That's cool.
You just got to do what the show and what the song requires, and that show is a different show to Lockie's. It's a different beast altogether, and that's not discrediting either.
Yeah.
You have to be able to adapt to what you're playing, and what I've learned over the years playing with Dad is that I know what he wants, and he wants it to be relentless. He wants it to be energetic, and he wants it to be solid.
Yep.
So all I have to do is just make sure that it is just that powerhouse gig, and that it's you're not dropping anything. It's not. As soon as the balls drop out of that gig, he'll notice. He'll turn around. He'll yell at you.
Yeah, right.
So it doesn't matter if you're his son, you're whoever. Like,
yep.
If you mess up that gig, you'll be held accountable. So it's So with Dad, it's like I have different variations that I play on certain songs, and I'll play around with things. But for the most part, it's not mapped out. It's not run to click. It's just it moves. It pushes. It pulls. For the first part of my career with Dad, I did play to a click.
Right.
And then it was just one of those things that kept everyone else kind of in time. No one else heard it. I had it in my head. And then
was that by choice for yourself? Did you want to be playing to a click, or
yeah? That it was one of those things. When I came in, I know Warren played to a click, and so I was just like, the guys that I'd known before that had played to click. So I was like, well, I'll do the same, and I'll make sure that's part of my skill set, which is also a very important skill to have. Being able to play along to a click like that, because it makes you effective in studio applications. It's good for for just finding your pocket. If you're playing along to clicks, you're developing a good sense of time, and then once you take it out, you kind of, that pocket moves around a touch, but you kind of add your personality to it. So
yep.
It was just one of those things. Like when I came into the gig, it was like it was part of it. Then there were a couple of gigs where that we didn't have enough lines or something to run the click, and then I'd run it without it, and it was never a weird thing to run it without. It was just, if we don't have it, we don't have it. And then the front of house guy and the monitors guy said, "Oh, it felt really good without." And I went to Dad and said, "Look, do you mind if I just do this run without the click?" And he goes, "Yeah, for sure." And then what I've found of late, there are certain songs that you want. Because adrenaline is a incredibly hard thing to control sometimes, and no matter who you are, there will be times where you play things at either a faster or a slower tempo, and so there was on the last tour with Dad, it was like he said, "Oh, maybe run click for a few things," and so what I had was the Tama metronome has a cool setting where you can program your set list in.
Mm-hmm.
You can hit go and it plays click for 8 bars,
mm-hmm.
and then it turns off and it switches to the next song. So you don't have to press next. It just automatically goes to the next in the program. So it gets you
before you count it.
It gets me counting at the top of the song. So I know, look, I'm in the right pocket now, and it's not rushing or anything. And then it can move a little bit once that switches off. And then so I was running that for maybe, let's say if we had a 25 song show, maybe like 10 songs,
mm-hmm.
maybe a little less. Yeah. So it's just one of those, it's both good or a bad thing. It's if the show requires it, it's not a bad thing. Yeah.
So were you doing that to kind of, you were just talking about the adrenaline before, and were you doing that to kind of just sort of calm yourself and bring yourself down to a bit of a level, and then you get kind of used to kind of reprogramming yourself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it was more like I found it, and you find it even now. You kind of get into habits.
Yep.
And I noticed, certain songs I was consistently playing it at a just where it felt like it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we've adapted the tempos over the years. Like if it feels good for a certain period at a slower tempo, we'll kind of they'll become the normal.
Yep.
And then you would find and from the opposite side, you'd find often that when you'd listen back to the gigs and you'd hear like maybe one song, oh, that's too fast, and it loses its heaviness, it loses the effectiveness that it has.
Right.
So then you're like, well, to take out that kind of variable of the adrenaline, because that part of the set is a high adrenaline section, and when you're playing, you feel like you're playing it slower than you are. It's like, but it's just that's the way adrenaline works, and so it just takes out that kind of that risk factor. You know that you're going to be where the tempo is meant to be at the start. So I mean, it's an effective tool in that instance, and it allows the song to maintain its heaviness. Yeah,
very cool.
Because you can really mess up a song by playing it at the wrong tempo. So it's just one of those things. You certain shows you want that kind of like if it's like a smaller kind of more intimate venue, then it's all right if it pushes and pulls more. But if it's like a big arena, and you got you kind of you got less room to hide. Really, it's kind of So and that last tour was a lot of arenas and a lot of really big venues. So we wanted to keep the tempos a bit more true. So it's just you make those calls tour by tour depending on what the artist wants, and it's same thing in recording. Sometimes you're recording to click, sometimes you're not.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, so going back to the Lockie Doley band. So, a lot more room to move. Lockie's an incredible performer.
Yeah.
One of the best Hammond players around. And
he's
what a
one
voice
of the best.
too, eh?
He's one of the best musicians that I've ever worked with. He's a guy that inspires you to and challenges you to innovate. Because you're playing with someone who's so good at something. You don't want to just be, and that band, it's like you don't just want to be the backing band. You want to be a part of that sound. You want to develop a unique part of that sound, which I've been fortunate enough to know Lockie for many years, and we've been making music together, not just in his band but with other bands for like over 15 years now. So it's like there's a long history there, and there's a long friendship there. So I had the opportunity. He approached me and said, "Oh, do you want to do some gigs?" I think it was about 2015 as well, probably. And I was like, yeah, really. And it's great because, I've been in that band since it's kind of really kind of gone viral and kind of, it's gone up a notch in terms of the popularity and just the music as well. Like I look back at, there's a particular show, Blues on Broadbeach in 2016, which was kind of one of our first viral videos from that show. Right. And I look back at the way we were playing then, and it's so different to how we're playing now.
In what way?
It's evolved in a way. It's
right.
We've had a lot of time on the road together, and we've had a lot of shit happen, good and bad, and that reflects in how a band evolves. And it's just it was great then, and it's great now. It's just a different beast. It's kind of taken on a new kind of intensity. It's a fucking heavy 3-piece. It's really really musical. It's really kind of keeps you on your toes. Like playing that gig, it's really exciting because you just don't know what's going to happen. It's unpredictable, which is good. It's kind of that a bit of a throwback to music of the 60s, 70s, where it's a bit of experimentation. You're trying things. You're kind of like that train that's on the edge of the tracks could derail at any moment. But that's what gives it the excitement, and the audience really kind of take on that energy as well. it's a pleasure to make music with Lockie, and we've had some phenomenal bass players: Jan Bangma, Chris Pearson, Joel Burton, James Hazelwood. Lots of different great bass players as well. So it's really cool. Every time we play with a different bass player, it's like there's certain things each different one's gonna do, and little things you just play around with, and it's cool. That's a phenomenal band to make music with, for sure.
Very cool. Very cool. Now I noticed in your there was a picture on Instagram about your drum room and your ISO room, and I need to ask you because in my ISO and in my room, I've got a TV out there, and I've got a Nintendo Switch, and I've got FIFA 18, but you've got FIFA 20.
Hell yeah!
Right, so I'm weighing up buying 20, but I really like 18. So why should I move up to FIFA 20 and not FIFA? And why should I move up from FIFA 18 to FIFA 20?
I mean, the gameplay is not that different from 18. It's it's evolved a little bit. It's obviously little things change every year, but it's that. For me, it's just keeping up with the new teams, the new jerseys, all the transfers, and then there's a new mode. There's like a street mode as well. So
cool.
You've got 18. There's the journey, which was the kind of cool. I think that was maybe it's the second journey game. So there's like a side game within that where you kind of develop a career of a player.
Yeah, I'm right into that. I'm Christian Eriksen, and he started at Spurs, moved to Manchester City, and I've just transferred. I just got a big offer to Barcelona, so I've headed over there now. So
yeah, well, the new one has a new game mode, which is like a what do you call it? A street mode. So it's like street football.
That's cool.
Kind of cool.
That's cool.
It's just one of those things. I always have to get the new game because I'm so. That's there are a few loves in my life. Music is a big love.
Yep.
And football is an equally big love in my life.
Right.
It's on a pedestal with music in terms of passion.
That's cool.
And so I have to have the latest game and the latest teams and stuff because I'm following every league in the world and I'm watching games constantly. I don't just watch one league. I watch like pretty much all of them. So
I got you.
And so that's also one of the things that's been really weird to adapt to in isolation is that there's no football on.
Yeah.
Because normally I would be watching a lot, like probably 10 to 20 games a week.
Yeah, right. That's full on.
Yeah.
See,
so,
I'm a big rugby union fan, and the Super Rugby stopped, but that's in New Zealand.
They've announced rugby's coming back. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so New Zealand's just announced a interclub tournament which starts in June.
Yeah,
just the New Zealand teams playing.
Yeah,
and hopefully we're aiming for some test matches later in the year. But the thing with going back to the FIFA thing, EA Sports stopped making rugby union games at about 2008.
Yeah,
and I would buy all those rugby games, up until they stopped making them, and I would play them every morning. I'd get up in the morning, I'd have my coffee, and I'd play a game of rugby, and then I'd go to work.
Yeah.
And I'd missed that for years and years, and then during ISO, the Nintendo store had a slash on prices of all the games, and FIFA 18 was like $20.
Yeah, and that's the thing, there's not been a rugby game as good since Lomu.
Oh yeah, that's a classic. Yeah, that's PlayStation 1.
That was the
was
pinnacle for rugby games, and but it's funny because I've spent so many years on tour buses around the world, and I always have FIFA with me on tour. That's the game that I have.
That's cool. That's cool.
That and Football Manager. There's a managing simulation game that's on a computer. That's because you've always got so much time on tour buses where you just have to do something, and I'm not the kind of guy that sleeps very well often, and
right,
and so I'm always playing those games to kind of deal with the adrenaline post show, because quite often you finish a show, you get on the tour bus, you're driving overnight to the next place
Yeah.
and repeating, So that's one of my things is I just, football games.
Awesome. That's really cool. Do you have a pre-show warm-up or practice regime that you follow every gig, or it's just kind of gig to gig?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't necessarily do like a rudiment warm up or it's not so much the stick work.
Yep.
I'm not really kind of doing that before show. What I'm doing is I'm preparing my body and my mind for what's about to happen. Okay. And what I'm, because I've found, obviously my years spent studying with Dave DeCenzo, he had problems as a young fella where he burnt his body out and he had to reteach himself and revamp his technique to, change how he was playing so he didn't have the problems with tendonitis and stuff that he had previously. I've had some horrendous injuries in my life, not just music, but accidents and whatnot and, broken bones and stuff. And so I prepare my body as much as I can. I treat it like a sport, because obviously Dad's gig is a high intensity gig and it's, one of the main things that people tell me after that show is how relentless I am on the drums. And that's because I condition myself for that, so I'm training whenever I can, keeping my body fit. So it usually starts about an hour before the show. Mm-hmm. I'll usually do about 20 minutes of stretching. So I'm stretching, I've got pretty much a routine that I go through.
Yep.
Of all my stretches, which culminates with leg stretches, so calves especially. Mm-hmm. And this was basically trial and error. Like I would figure out what muscles I felt were cramping more than others and when they were cramping in the show. And the ones that were generally giving me trouble were my calves about 3/4 of the way through the show. But let's say we're talking a 2.5 hour show, about 3/4 of the way through. Sometimes I'd get a calf cramp and right forearm from the hi-hat.
Yep.
They were the main two, and they had a bit of upper back problems as well from, and shoulder problems. I've had a number of shoulder issues from, overuse, because it's not unusual for me to play, 150 to 200 plus shows a year.
Yep.
And at that intensity, you are getting a lot of vibration and shock to your joints. So one of the other things I'm a strong advocate for is supplements. So I take magnesium before and during the show, much like a sportsman would.
Yep.
And then I'm taking protein after the show to help the muscles recover because, I've had in my, parallel lives, where I've always wanted to play sport as well. Like I've known a lot of sportsmen.
Yep.
And a lot of the sportsmen I know have wanted to be musicians, and so they come to shows and stuff. And when they watch me play, they're like, "Oh, it's like you're playing a match. You're playing a game of sport." And it's the same, like you go through your whole career as a sportsman with little niggles and little injuries that are things that are bothering your body, and they just play through them, get injections, get treatments before games and stuff. Much like I prepare my body, I have little aches and stuff that I have constantly, and I just you find ways to get through it, and that's for me. The magnesium is really helpful. So if there's any drummers out there that find they're getting problems with endurance and cramping
and cramping, especially,
and they feel like they're getting to that stage of the gig where you get tired and you can't lift that intensity back up, and you generally, I go to so many gigs and I hear when a drummer gets tired because you hear them kind of drop off the intensity, but it doesn't kind of get back up, and then you're like, well, that's kind of that usually happens at quite an important part of the set where you really want it to lift, and so the way that I prepare my body for the show, with the stretching, the supplements and stuff, allows me to get to that point. And it's like when you're in a workout and you get to that set of let's say you're doing 20 bench presses, you get to 15, your body starts to hurt like shit, and you go, you just have to push through it. And that's when, I get that second wind and you're able to, not just get back to the level you're at, but elevate it again. And that's, another thing that comes into play with that adrenaline that I was talking about. It's like, you have to really control a lot of elements in a show. So that's, my preparation is incredibly important to that. And, for the most part, I'm not drinking before or during the show. Sometimes, but for the most part, no. And to be honest, I don't really drink that often after. It's just occasionally. But yeah, it's really about, getting into the right state of mind for the show you're playing. And, when I was with the 10-10ers, that was a much less intense physically for me. Like physically, it wasn't as intense a show.
Yeah.
But mentally, I was exhausted after those shows because you had to be so concentrated. And it doesn't matter how hard you hit or what it is. Playing a concert is intense, no matter what level of show you're playing at, and you need to prepare yourself for that because, if not, you're not going to be effective, and the result of that is either you're not going to get booked again, or they might, you'll only ever get a certain caliber of show that you're booked for. Yeah,
gotcha.
So I'm fortunate that I've over the years developed something that works for me and keeps my body in shape and keeps my mind in shape, and it keeps me effective as a musician. The other big thing is getting your ears ready. You kind of you have to kind of go through kind of a mantra where you kind of switching on all the different senses, that are important to the show. And one of the biggest skills that I've developed over the years is the ability to, whether I'm playing with wedges or I'm playing with in-ears, I've developed the ability to be able to single out sounds from each different instrument at different points in the night to make sure that, I'm conversing with them appropriately musically. So it's important to be able to, if you're, you're hearing certain parts that jump out, you have to then, train your ear to be able to just listen to that instrument for that period of time, and you have to be able to focus on what's going on around you, because there's no point just playing your part and not listening to what's going on around you. The most important part of being in a band is being in a band. You have to, you're only as good as the collaboration. So it truly is a collaborative effort, and you have to prepare yourself to be open to that. Because if you go out there and look, every band prepares themselves differently, and every musician does as well. Some people like to kind of isolate themselves before they go on, just to kind of get focused. And I'm a little bit like that at times, but you have to, when it comes down to it, you have to, kind of have a moment together and say, look, let's get it. And you have to really kind of, acknowledge that this is going to be a collaborative effort. So that's, it all comes down to how you prepare and how you, it's kind of it's a mentality you get into, and it's something that it's just come second nature to me now. And if I don't go through those steps, I feel uncomfortable when I'm going on stage.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it's one of those things, like I've part of being in isolation, I've started teaching people, and, that's part of the wisdom that I'm able to share now that, I've been given over the years by the people I respect. Yeah.
And still so young too. What, you're only 34, eh?
Yeah.
You're 34?
Yeah.
Man, I mean, you've got a lifetime of, musical experience already, and so young. So it's
oh man, I'm fortunate. I love what I do, and I've, you got to love it.
That's it. I cut you off earlier. We're about to talk about your solo stuff, your EP. So let's talk a little bit about that. And do you have plans in the future for solo music?
Yeah, so there's two chapters to this story, I guess. The first chapter starts around, say, 2014. And it's actually, I forgot, I did a tour with Reece Mastin, who's great. He's a cracking singer. So I did a tour with him, And I think it was 2014. And while I was on that tour, I had a chance encounter on an airplane and at the baggage carousel with a guy and a young girl that he managed or manages. And anyway, it was one of those weird things. Like, they walked past me on the airplane, and they were kind of two people that looked familiar, but you kind of don't know where from. And he kind of looked at me like he knew me and kind of smiled and kind of nodded. And I was like, oh shit, I don't know who this is. Like, I probably met him somewhere. And yeah, anyway, so I kind of kind of forgot about it by the end of the flight, to be honest. And then I'm waiting for my bags at the carousel, and I see him and this girl walking up towards me, and I'm going, oh fuck, they do know me. Like, I was just drawing a blank. And luckily, the first thing he said was, "Oh, don't worry, you don't know me."
Awesome.
But I know you. And then, you know, he introduced himself to me. Steve James, his name is, and the girl is Alice Fionn. And they said, oh, she was doing some supports for Tina Arena at the time, and I was out with Reece, and I just kind of I invited them to the show, and they came along, and then we were just chatting, and he was just like, oh, Alice is writing some new songs for her record, and, you know, if you're down to collaborate at some point, would love to write some songs. So I was doing a lot of writing at the time. And I kind of said, yeah, cool. I said, I've got the next weekend off. If you guys want to, you know, after these shows, if you want to, I don't know where you're based, but if you want to come to Sydney, I've got access to studio and whatnot, and we can, you know, see what happens. And they said, oh yeah, it's probably, you know, we'll see what happens. And, you know, when that kind of conversation happens, you know, 90% of the time you never hear from them again. And you kind of just move on with your life. And anyway, I get a call the next day, and it was Steve, and he said, oh, we just landed in Sydney. We decided to come down for the weekend. So are you free this afternoon? I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we got together at Dad's studio and sat around the piano, and it was just one of those things. It just, like, the personalities clicked, the music clicked. I mean, I'm obviously more known as a rock and roll drummer in Australia, but, you know, when it comes to my own writing and my own voice, I'm kind of a bit more in the kind of indie folk kind of realm. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we're writing, and one of the things I love to do is write harmonies and different parts. And so we wrote, within a couple of hours, we'd written a couple of beautiful songs. And they left that day and said, oh, well, I know we said that you were going to write for Alice, but but it sounds so good with you both singing. Why don't you consider a new project? And I was like, wait a minute, no one's ever really kind of asked me to sing in that way. You know, it's like, it's one of those things that I come from a family that's very intimidating to be a singer in. You know, because all my sisters sing incredibly, and my dad's, you know, uncles, and, you know, everyone sings.
Yeah. And
I've you know, I haven't got Dad's voice. I haven't got that range and that strength, but I've got a good voice.
Yep.
And it was one of those things I've always been interested in singing, but never, you know, no one had ever asked me to, really. So they were the first two to ask me to sing. And so the next week or two, we ended up recording an EP with my uncle Daisley, and he produced it for us, and we put it out under the name Chance Carousel. And you know, just actually Mark Lizotte came up with that name, you know, based off how it all came about. It was just a chance meeting at a carousel, and we thought it kind of rolled off the tongue nicely as a name, and we put a 5-track EP out there, self-titled, under Chance Carousel, and it's, you know, it's beautiful music. It's got her on acoustic and electrics, and myself on piano and percussion, some drums. But it's really, for me, I was able to step away from the drums and, you know, focus more on the voice and the piano. And it's a lot more acoustic than other records I've recorded. And obviously it's the only record where I'm singing that I've put out myself, you know. So very proud of how that was, you know. It's out there, and you know, it was was a very cool thing to be a part of. And, who knows what will happen in the future. If there's more music to be made, like there's definitely some songs that we didn't record that I feel like should be out there. So, it's one of those things, never say never. And then more recently, so I was on tour with Lockie in Europe, and it's one of those things every year we tend to have like a week to 2 week break in the middle of the tour where there's just no shows, or like there's, because it's just hard to fill up. When you're over there for a couple of months, you're going to have little pockets where you've got free time.
Yep.
And what I usually like to do is, because it's always in midsummer, it's always expensive to come home, but usually you can get a cheap flight somewhere near you or whatever. So, last year when I was on tour with Lockie, I had a week and a half off, and I got like a real super cheap flight and went to Turkey and went to Istanbul and just kind of had a cultural experience there. Met up with some friends and just, got some kind of, some cultural experience under my belt, something to add to the, influences on my music. The year before that, I happened to, I was talking to one of my best friends, Michelle Nasrallah, we were neighbors at Berklee. He was a student with me. We traveled to Ghana together. We've had, an incredible amount of life experience together. And, he was one of my groomsmen at my wedding, and a dear friend and an incredible musician. He's Brazilian, lives in Sao Paulo in Brazil. And I happened to be talking to him on this tour. We were just chatting about, why don't we make some music together at some point? And so then I had that little kind of break in the middle of the tour, and I looked, and there was actually a really cheap flight to Sao Paulo. So I called him up and said, "Are you in Sao Paulo?" He said, "Yeah, I just got back there." And so I flew down to Sao Paulo in Brazil and stayed with him for 10 days, and also met up with another great friend and guitarist, Alvaro Capaz, in Brazil, and we started kind of writing some music. We recorded something there, and then he ended up coming out to Australia after that trip, after the tour had finished, and he spent some time with me, and we wrote and recorded a bunch of songs, and those songs have now evolved into a band. We're gonna put out a record, very soon. It's actually it's in the final stages of mixing and mastering at the moment, and it's one of those awesome collaborations. We collaborated with another Berklee friend who's from Mongolia. She's a Mongolian throat singer, Uyanga Bolbatar, and she goes by Uyanga Bold. And she did all the vocals on the new Milan movie, and she's one of those girls that her voice is on like every like epic video game, fantasy video game, doing that throat singing thing. She's awesome. And I was with Michelle in LA last year, and we had this track that has this kind of real long kind of odyssey sort of. It's like a big kind of jam out, and it just felt right. And we're like, well, it needs another element. And I just kind of called Uyanga and said, look, I feel like this song needs some Mongolian throat singing on it, as you do. As you do. So I called her, and she was I think she was in Malibu, and we were out in like Sun Valley or something. And she was like, yeah, I've actually got the day off. And like, yeah, like, cause I'd seen Uyanga like years before and gone and hung out at her joint, and we kind of spoke about making music together, but we never had the time. So I was like, now's the time. And so she got in a car and came out with her husband, and took like an hour and 3/4 in LA traffic to get to us. And she ended up doing a couple of passes singing this just epic vocal track on this song. So little things like that just kind of fell together really nicely. And, so we've got a really kind of cool thing that's going to come out soon. So stay tuned for that. It's looking like it's going to be called Genghis Nash.
Wow, that's a cool name.
Yeah, so
that's cool, man. Looking forward to that. Very interested about the Mongolian throat singing. I'm going to Google that tonight.
Yeah,
so I get an idea. And
I'll send you her some links to her singing, because she's
great,
absolutely incredible. And it's the same thing. It's like Matt Gasker, like those kind of cats. Like we all knew each other when we were late teens, like from like in our like developmental years. And,
Yep.
It's so nice that all these people have gone on to great success, which is really cool. It's actually this week, it's the 10th anniversary of my graduation from Berklee. So,
oh, wow.
That's a milestone, and I've actually just spent the last couple of days, reaching out to other Berklee cats, just saying, look, it's been already 10 years. Like, yeah, it's crazy. And a lot of us have started families now, and a lot have found some really great success. So it's really cool, really cool.
That's very cool. Now, I have a Spotify playlist, or the Gig Life podcast has a Spotify playlist.
Yeah.
And up to this point, up till today, actually, it's filled with songs, and will remain to keep getting filled with songs that my guests have either played on or written or such and such. So we're still going to add to that. We're going to put some songs that you've played on. But
cool.
We're changing it up a little bit now, and we're going to add to this list what I asked you today, sent you a message today. I said, can you tell me a song, just one song, that we can put on the playlist? And I'm going to play a little bit of it, and it's called, well, actually, you can introduce the song, and we'll just play it a little bit, and then I'll bring the volume down, and you can talk to me about the song and how it's inspired you. And okay, so over to you, man. What's the song?
Yeah, so it's by one of my favorite bands in the world, the Meters, New Orleans funk band, and it's a song called "It Ain't No Use" off the album Rejuvenation.
So why this song, man? What's?
I have a long history with not just the Meters, but this album, Rejuvenation. My dad introduced me to them at a young age, and they quickly became one of my favorite bands of all time. Like I said at the start of the podcast, Zigaboo, Joseph Zigaboo, Model Est, is one of the greatest drummers of all time, in my opinion, and one of the greatest groovers there's ever been. And this album, it's one of those albums that when I kind of go through periods where I practice and I don't. Quite often when I come off a tour and I've been playing show after show, I don't feel like practicing. I feel like just kind of stepping away from the drums and kind of enjoying my family and stuff. But when I do get into practice mode, and in the past where I've been in kind of, at Berklee, for example, where I practiced every day, I would start and end my practice by playing through that whole album, start to finish. Right. So I'd spend like an hour playing through it, do about an hour or 2 hours of various things, and then I'd play it again at the end. So It Ain't No Use is it's kind of towards the back half of it's towards the end of the album, and it's kind of this drawn out jam, and I like the spontaneity of it, and the kind of how it just kind of, it gets into a trance, and it just kind of draws you in, and it just has this absolute incredible groove to it. Obviously George Porter's bass playing is just incredible. Him and Zigaboo holding that pocket down, and it's one of those things that the track just goes on, and there's like great backing vocals. I think the Pointer Sisters are the backing vocalists on it, and so it's just like it's just a fucking cool track, to be honest. And
it's 11 and a half minutes long. It's a lot.
It jams on it, and everyone takes a solo. So it's one of the rare Zigaboo drum solos on a Meters record, which is really cool because he just plays groove solos, and I've always been uncomfortable with taking solos. I've never liked drum solos really, in the traditional sense, and so whenever I've been asked to take a solo, I generally play grooves, and I'm definitely more from the Zigaboo or the Steve Gadd school of solos, where you kind of I'm kind of trying to develop themes and keep it in time. Like I don't really just do like a loose free
Gotcha.
solo where you just kind of go off on a tangent. Like I like to have a theme and kind of theme of variations, really, kind of just little things around a groove. So the thing that Zigaboo does well in this song at the end is he just plays some really killer variations of the groove that he's playing throughout. And then it has this awesome moment at the end of his solo where George Porter comes back in on the bass, and it's one of those moments in the song that just grabs you by the nut and you go, ooh.
That's cool. So check that out. The link to the playlist is in the show notes. Now, to round it out, Jack, tell us some of your goals, man. Like, places you want to play, people you want to play with, or just, if you can share some of your goals, and that'd be really cool.
Yeah, so I mean, the goals are things that change all the time. I mean, obviously I've had an incredibly fortunate life, and I've met and performed with some wonderful people, and I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of my idols. So I've met Zigaboo, I've met Ian Pace, James Gadsden, who played on a lot of Dad's records. I've met him, and Bruce Springsteen I've met, and he was incredibly friendly and nice to me. And there's so many people that I've like thought, I want to work with these people, and then I realize I've been able to, either make music with them or hang out with them and gain some life experience from them. In terms of goals for the future, I definitely want to make more of my own music. There are certain artists that I would love to work with for sure. There's a singer from Mali, Umu Sangare, who I would love to work with in the future. Bit out of left field. It's just my goals are just to make good music. I've been fortunate to, play in some pretty cool places. I would like to play more in South America. I'd like to explore different parts of the world. I think I'm up to something like 65 countries that I've toured in. So it's one of those things when I get a tour schedule and there's a place that I haven't been, I get really excited. So for me, it's all about discovering more, learning more. I want to, you're never finished learning. So I'm excited to just, go to new places, discover new music, and, just increase my, like I said, what I got from Berklee was a vocabulary in many different languages. And my main goal is to, become fluent in as many musical languages as possible. And, to do that, you have to travel and you have to immerse yourself in culture. So that's my main goal. And then, make good music. Like that's all I want to do is just continue to make music and inspire people. I'm now at the point in my career where, there's a younger generation coming through, and, I've got some young students. So that's very inspiring to me now. Passing on some wisdom, because I've had a lot of time on the road and I've had a lot of experience. We didn't even talk about Rose Tattoo as well. So,
yes. Let's talk a little bit about Rose Tattoo, and then we'll drop it back in.
So Rose Tattoo came about in 2018, I think it was. So it's one of the more recent gigs that I've kind of taken on. It was one of the, it's funny because Angry's known me since I was a baby. I remember seeing Angry a lot growing up as a kid. He's just one of the extended musical family that was, part of our family's life. And, and when I was also a young drummer coming up, one of the guys that really helped me with my first, endorsement and helped me with my first tour in terms of like getting me, just playing with good energy was Paul DeMarco. So I have a lot to thank Paul for helping me when I was, 16, 17 years old. And so when obviously all that stuff went down with him going to jail and stuff, it was very sad to hear. And I can remember because we'd done tours with Dad with Rose Tattoo, like double bills, and I can remember doing the benefit for Mick Cox just before he sadly passed away, and I can remember at that point I had one tattoo, I think it was, and I can remember Angry coming up to me, smashed backstage at the Enmore, and he grabbed my arm and kind of he saw a tattoo, goes, "Oh, you're on the right track there, young fella," and so then a couple of years later, I got like quite a significantly big tattoo on one of my arms, and we saw each other again somewhere, and he grabbed me and kind of he like ran his arm down my tattoo and went, "We'll talk, you and I." So he kind of always had gave these little hints that maybe we'll talk at some point. And and in actual fact, he'd seen me play with Dad a lot, but what got me that gig was he saw me play with Lockie.
Right.
So Lockie and we did one of the Rock the Boat cruises.
Yep.
And Angry was on that, not as Rose Tattoo, but just as Angry Anderson. And he was at one of our gigs, and he had an incredibly good time, and he pulled me aside after the gig and just said how inspiring it was, and and we had a good moment there, and then lo and behold, I get a call from him when I get back to Australia, and he asked me to join Rose Tattoo. So that was an honor for me, because obviously I grew up knowing the music very well. It's part of my DNA. It's part of my, my history. We're talking about, people who spent a lot of time with my dad when in his formative years as well. So for me, it was an honor to get the call, and, replacing a drummer like John Watson, who is another inspiring guy to me. Mm-hmm. So that was a big deal for me. It was kind of like a validation of everything I've worked hard for in my life. You get the calls from the bands you love if you work hard enough. And so, I just basically wanted to, honor the music, honor the fans, and, just do a good job. I wanted to give it a new energy as well. That's one of the things that people hire me for, is they know the energy that I bring to a gig, especially a rock gig. And, we made some great music together, and we re-recorded the first album, not to just kind of redo it, but just to honor it for the 40th anniversary of that record. So that's called Outlaws. That actually finally came out a few months ago, and so that's the most recent release I think that I'm on, is Outlaws by Rose Tattoo, and it was incredibly. It was an honor to be a part of that. Like we're talking about, you grow up with, people you idolize, and then suddenly you're playing in a band with the original bass player from AC/DC, and, Mark Evans and Bob Spencer, who's a, incredible guitarist, and Di Pritchard, so it was an incredible lineup for that band. Like, unfortunately, a lot of the historic members have passed on now, and Angry's flying the flag now. But I feel like we've honored it in a good way. So I've spent a lot of time the last few years on the road with them, and we've gone through some great moments and also some heartbreaking moments. So it's been a journey, man. Those guys they're part of my musical family now, so I've got a lot of time for all those guys. So I'm very appreciative of that opportunity. Yeah.
Great stuff. Jackie Barnes, really inspiring. Listen to your talk, man, and so glad that we could hook this up and you could spend some time with me tonight and chat about your life. It's been really cool, man. Very thankful.
Too easy, mate. Well, thanks for having me, and it's good to be here.
Sweet as. All the best, man. And hopefully you're out playing some gigs soon, and when you're in Sydney, we'll catch up. That'll be really cool.
Sounds good, brother. Thanks for having me.
Sweet as.
All right, mate.
All right, Jackie. Cheers, my man.
All right, bye.
I'll put all my eggs in one basket for the last 80 years. And I've lost a lot of friends along the way, and amassed a lot of tears. You see, I keep on borrowing more time. Anything for the cause. And now, when I blink of an eye, our baby's now a boy. We're gonna make a break, no more give and take. Ain't gonna waste no time on the same mistakes. Well, this is our time, it's a meltdown. Ain't gonna take a chance to reach the high. I feel myself teetering, so close to the edge. See, one moment I've come so far, and the next I ain't achieved shit. I always thought I was a nice guy, with some talent to stake, but maybe I'm a neither. And tonight is make or break.